Are you seriously blaming a kid for this? A woman in the priority boarding lounge froze as a cup of latte splashed across her white blouse. Then the gate supervisor smirked and said it was probably for the best. She didn't board anyway. Everyone saw it. Nobody moved, except a 13-year-old girl who hated attention and still took one step forward. One sentence from her flipped the whole room, and 3 months later, a letter showed up at her front door that made her mom sit down and cry. But to understand why a quiet kid like Lena Carter would ever step into a moment like that, we need to go back a few hours before the coffee, before the crowd went silent, before anyone pointed at her like she was the problem. Lena Carter was 13 years old, and if you asked her what her favorite thing in the world was, she'd probably say, not being noticed. She wasn't shy in the way people joke about. She didn't hide behind her hair or mumble into her hoodie. Lena could speak clearly when she had to. She did well in school. Teachers liked her. But she had this habit, this instinct of scanning a room and choosing the smallest possible space for herself. The seat near the window, the corner of the line, the place where nobody would ask her questions. Because when you grow up in a home where every dollar is counted twice, you learn early that attention can be expensive. Lena lived with her mom, Rachel Carter, in a small apartment that always smelled faintly like laundry detergent and reheated leftovers. Rachel worked the kind of jobs where your feet hurt before your shift even starts. The kind of jobs where you smile at people who don't look you in the eye, because you need the paycheck more than you need the satisfaction of being right. Rachel wasn't dramatic about it. She didn't sit Lena down and say, "We're struggling." She didn't have to. Lena could hear it in the way her mom sighed when the mail came. She could see it in the way Rachel paused before swiping her card at the grocery store. She could tell by the way their budget conversations always happened in the kitchen, late at night, when Rachel thought Lena was asleep. And still, Rachel had rules. Not the kind of rules you write on a fridge, the kind that live in your bones. "Say please," Rachel would tell her, even when the other person didn't deserve it. Don't lie to make things easier. And if you ever see someone being treated wrong, you don't join in. You don't laugh, and you don't pretend you didn't see it. Sometimes Rachel would say it more simply. We don't sell our dignity for comfort. That's the thing about families like theirs. People assume you have nothing, but you do have something. You have your name. You have your manners. You have the way you carry yourself when life tries to bend you into someone smaller. Rachel cared about that more than anything, and Lena absorbed it. Quietly, the way kids do when they're watching more than they're talking. That morning, Lena and Rachel were traveling back through the West, one of those long, stretched-out days where the airport becomes its own little universe. They weren't going on vacation. This wasn't some fancy mother-daughter trip for Instagram. They were going to see family. A short visit Rachel had squeezed in between shifts, like someone trying to breathe through a crack in a door. Lena had packed her backpack carefully, not with trendy stuff, with practical stuff. A charger, a snack, a thin scarf she liked because it felt like armor without looking like armor. She'd even brought a little folder with school papers inside, because Lena was that kind of kid, the kind who believes being prepared is a form of safety. And maybe it was, because in Lena's world, being unprepared meant something could go wrong, and there wouldn't be money to fix it. Even sitting in the airport, Lena couldn't completely relax. She kept thinking about the fall semester, about the honors classes she'd worked so hard to get into, about college, even though people told her 13 was too young to worry about college. But when you're smart and you're not rich, your brain does this thing where it runs ahead of you like a guard dog. It whispers, "How are we going to pay for it?" Rachel wanted big things for her daughter. Big. Good things. Not because Rachel cared about status. She didn't. Rachel cared about freedom. She cared about Lena not having to beg a manager for an extra shift. She cared about Lena never having to smile through disrespect just to keep the lights on. But wanting something and affording something are two different worlds. And Lena felt that gap every day. She felt it when a teacher mentioned a field trip fee and Rachel had to ask for a payment plan. She felt it when classmates talked about tutors and summer camps. She felt it when people assumed hard work was all you needed, as if hard work didn't already fill their entire lives. So Lena learned to do what Rachel did. Be polite, be grateful, be small. Not because she believed she was small, but because being small kept you out of trouble. And trouble had a cost. That's why what happened later didn't make sense, at least not at first. Because the Lena Carter we're talking about, the girl who didn't even like raising her hand in class unless she was 100% sure, that girl was not looking for a confrontation in a priority boarding lounge. She wasn't trying to be a hero. She wasn't trying to go viral. She wasn't trying to teach anyone a lesson. She just wanted to get on the plane, sit down quietly, and let her mom rest her eyes for a few minutes. But here's the truth. Nobody tells you when they talk about courage. Courage usually doesn't walk into your life like an opportunity. It walks in like a problem. It shows up as something unfair happening right in front of you. And your stomach tightens because you know deep down you're about to be tested on something you claim to believe. And in those moments, you don't rise to your best intentions. You fall back on what you've been trained to do. Rachel trained her daughter to respect herself. And even more importantly, Rachel trained her daughter to think. Because courage without judgment can get you hurt. But courage with a clear mind, that's the kind of courage that can change a room. So keep Lena in your mind as we go back to that glass-walled lounge, with the boarding screen blinking and the line inching forward. Because in just a few minutes, a woman would be humiliated in front of a crowd, and a girl who hated attention would have to decide what mattered more, staying invisible or staying right. Right now, back in that glass-walled lounge overlooking the runway, the air felt expensive. You know what I mean. The chairs were clean in that way that tells you nobody eats messy food there. The lighting was soft. The voices were quiet. Even the rolling suitcases sounded like they were trying not to offend anyone. And sitting near the windows, with her hands folded and her shoulders relaxed like she'd learned how to stay calm in public, was a woman named Naomi Brooks. If you walked past Naomi, you might not notice her at first. Not because she was invisible, because she wasn't, but because she wasn't trying to be seen. No designer logos shouting across her chest. No loud phone call about my assistant and my schedule. No name dropping. Just a simple outfit. Neat. Practical. The kind of clean look that says, I have places to be. Not, look at me while I go there. But there was something else about her that made people look twice. It was the way she carried herself. Naomi didn't sit like someone asking permission to exist. She didn't shrink. She didn't fidget. She wasn't performing confidence either, because there's a difference between confidence and performance. Naomi had the kind of steady presence you only get when life has tried to humble you, and you decided it wasn't allowed to. And Lena noticed that right away, because Lena was the kind of kid who noticed everything. Not in a nosy way, in a survival way. She noticed who cut in line and who apologized. She noticed who looked people in the eyes and who looked through them. She noticed the little signals adults sent without saying a word. And Naomi was sending a signal, even if she didn't mean to. It was a quiet signal that said, I belong anywhere I choose to be. Still, if you watched closely, you could see something behind that calm, a tiredness that didn't come from a long day of travel. It was the tiredness of someone who has been questioned before. Someone who has had to prove things that should never need proof. Have you ever met someone like that? Someone who smiles politely, Not because they're weak, but because they're tired of explaining basic respect to strangers. Someone who knows exactly how to keep their voice steady when the world tries to pull them into a fight. That was Naomi. She wasn't looking for conflict. She wasn't looking to teach anyone a lesson. She wasn't walking around waiting to be offended. She was there to board a flight like everyone else. But she also knew something most people don't realize until they've lived it. That in certain spaces marked priority, exclusive. Members, only your presence can feel like a question mark to the wrong person. And Naomi had learned how to answer that question without ever raising her voice. Because Naomi had a rule, just like Rachel did. Not the same words, same spine. Stay polite, stay composed. Don't give them the satisfaction of seeing you break. Not because you're afraid of them. Because you respect yourself too much to let someone else drag you into ugliness. That kind of discipline can look like softness if you don't understand it. But it isn't. It's strength under control. And there's something else about Naomi that matters for what comes next. She didn't need people to validate her. She didn't need to win the room. She didn't need to announce who she was. In fact, Naomi was the kind of person who usually let other people underestimate her, because she'd learned the difference between being underestimated and being powerless. Those are not the same. Lena was sitting a few seats away with Rachel, trying to keep her legs still and her backpack close. She kept glancing at the boarding screen, then back at her mom, then, almost without meaning to, at Naomi. And the longer Lena watched, the more she felt something she didn't fully have words for yet. Respect. Not for Naomi's clothes. Not for the seat she was sitting in. Not for any label. Respect for how she held herself. Because Lena could sense it, this woman had been tested before, and she had passed those tests without losing herself. At one point, Naomi looked up and caught Lena watching. Now, a lot of adults would have looked away or stared back like, "Can I help you?" Naomi didn't do that. She just gave Lena a small nod. No smile that asked for approval. No expression that begged for comfort. Just a nod that felt like "I see you seeing me." And Lena, without thinking too hard, nodded back. It was a tiny moment, a quiet moment. But sometimes the quiet moments are the ones that matter most, because they set something in motion. Because in that nod, Lena felt permission to believe what her mom had been trying to teach her for years. That dignity is not something anyone gives you. It's something you decide to keep. And a few minutes later, when the wrong person decided Naomi didn't belong in that lounge, it wouldn't just be Naomi on trial. It would be the idea of dignity itself. And that is why this story wasn't really about a boarding pass. It was about who gets treated like they belong, and who gets treated like they need permission. So hold on to that quiet nod between Lena and Naomi. Because before this is over, that same quiet respect is going to turn into something much louder. And it's going to force a room full of adults to face a question they've been avoiding when someone is being treated wrong right in front of you. What do you do with what you saw? But right now, back in that lounge, the moment was still quiet, still normal, still pretending. The boarding screen flickered. Names and zones updated. A soft chime went off every few minutes, like the building itself was reminding everyone to behave. Naomi sat with her calm posture, her eyes on the gate area. Not because she was anxious, but because experience teaches you something when you've been questioned before. You don't get to relax all the way, and that's when Claire Holden stepped into the picture. Claire was the kind of employee every company says they want. Neat uniform, perfect hair, clipboard in hand. A smile that looked professional from a distance. But up close, her smile had edges. You know that type of smile. The one that doesn't reach the eyes. The one that says, "I'm polite because policy requires it." Claire wasn't loud. She wasn't openly cruel. She didn't need to be. Because the most dangerous kind of power isn't the kind that screams. It's the kind that hides behind rules. Claire walked up to the gate and started doing what she was trained to do, checking IDs, scanning boarding passes, keeping the line moving. And for a minute, everything looked normal. Then Naomi stood, approached with her boarding pass, and that tiny shift happened. Claire's eyes went to Naomi's hand, then to Naomi's face, then back down again, like she was searching for the mistake. Claire took the boarding pass between two fingers, not like a person taking a ticket, more like a person examining something she didn't trust. Her voice stayed sweet. "Ma'am," Claire said, "just to confirm, you're aware this is the priority boarding area, right?" It sounded like a question, but it wasn't. It was an accusation dressed in customer service. Naomi didn't flinch, not outwardly. She just answered the way women like her learn to answer. "Yes, I'm aware." Claire tilted her head, still smiling. "Okay, because we've had a lot of confusion today." Confusion. That word did a lot of work. It made Naomi sound like part of a problem without ever calling her one. And notice how clean it was. Claire didn't say anything that could get her reported. She didn't insult Naomi directly. She just planted a doubt in the air and let Naomi breathe it in. Naomi kept her voice calm. "My pass is right there." Claire scanned it anyway. The machine beeped. Green. Valid. It should have ended right there. A normal employee would have said, "You're all set." But Claire didn't move on. Instead, she paused. Long enough for the next person in line to notice. Long enough for a few heads to turn. Then she said, "Can I see your ID?" Now, asking for an ID isn't always wrong. Sometimes it's routine. Sometimes it's policy. But the way Claire said it made it feel like Naomi had done something to deserve suspicion. Naomi reached into her bag, pulled out her ID, and handed it over without a word. Because that was her rule. Stay polite. Stay composed. Don't give them the satisfaction. Claire stared at the ID longer than she needed to. Then she looked back at Naomi and asked, "Is this your current address?" Naomi blinked once. Yes. Claire nodded slowly like she was still deciding. Behind Naomi, the line wasn't moving anymore. And that's when it happened. That invisible pressure. The pressure of being the person everyone is waiting on. The pressure that makes good people apologize for things that aren't their fault. Naomi didn't apologize, but Lena saw the moment anyway, because Lena was watching. She watched Naomi stand there, quiet and steady, while this stranger acted like she was doing Naomi a favor by letting her board. Lena watched Rachel tighten her grip on her own bag, like she could feel the tension through the air. And she watched Claire, too. Claire's voice stayed soft, but her questions kept stacking. "What's your final destination today? What seat are you in? Do you have any documentation for the upgrade?" Documentation? That's another clean word. It makes the person in front of you sound guilty without ever saying guilty. Naomi answered each question, calmly, clearly, like she was reciting the truth in a courtroom she never asked to enter. And it would have been bad enough if Claire was just slowing Naomi down. But she didn't stop there. Claire stepped slightly to the side, blocking the scanner with her body, and said in the same sweet tone, "I'm just going to need to verify something in the system. It'll only take a minute." A minute. That's what they always say. A minute can cost you a flight. A minute can cost you a connection. A minute can cost you a meeting that changes your life. Naomi glanced up at the screen. Boarding was progressing. Her zone was being called. And still, Claire didn't move. Instead, Claire tapped on her tablet slowly, dramatically, like she wanted the room to notice she was working. And the room did notice. A businessman nearby, Mark, looked up for half a second, and then looked away like his eyes could get him in trouble. A tired mom, Olivia, shifted in her seat and stared at her phone harder, like if she didn't see it, she wouldn't have to feel it. And that's when you realize something important. People think power is loud, but sometimes power is just a delay. Power is making someone stand there while a room watches. Power is forcing them to choose between speaking up and being labeled difficult. And here's the part that should make your stomach twist. The biggest power in that moment wasn't even Claire's. It was the silence around her. Because when a room full of adults says nothing, it turns one person's behavior into a social truth. It whispers, "This must be normal." It whispers, "She must deserve it." It whispers, "Don't be the one who makes it worse." That's what silence does. It doesn't just avoid conflict. It feeds it. It turns wrong into routine. And Claire knew that. You could tell by how comfortable she was. She was operating like someone who'd done this before and never been challenged. Naomi's jaw tightened for a second, just a second, and then she relaxed it again. She took a slow breath, because Naomi understood the trap. If she raised her voice, Claire could call security and say, "She's being aggressive." If she protested too strongly, Claire could say, "I'm just following protocol." So Naomi did what so many people do when they've learned the hard way. She stayed polite. She stayed still. She held on to her dignity like it was something she could protect by sheer will. And Lena watched all of it. She watched the way Naomi was being forced to prove she belonged. She watched the way Claire's words were clean, but her intention was dirty. And she felt that familiar knot in her stomach, the one you feel when something is wrong. But everyone is acting like it's fine. Lena's eyes flicked to her mom. Rachel was watching too, not speaking, not moving, because she understood the other side of this. She understood what happens when you challenge the wrong person in the wrong place. She understood the risk of being pulled into a scene. And Lena understood something else. This wasn't just about Naomi. This was about what kind of world you live in when protocol becomes a weapon. And as Claire kept tapping, and Naomi kept standing, and the lounge kept pretending, Lena's heart started beating faster, because she could feel it. This was the moment before the moment. The moment where you either stay small, or you decide you won't. The room went quiet. Not the calm kind of quiet. The kind where everyone is trying to make themselves invisible. Claire kept tapping on her tablet like nothing unusual was happening. Naomi stood still, composed. Her boarding pass already scanned, her ID already checked. And yet, she was still there, waiting, being watched. Around them, people who clearly saw what was happening suddenly found better things to look at. The boarding screen, their phones, the ceiling, the floor, anything but the truth unfolding right in front of them. Mark, the businessman in the pressed blazer, glanced up from his laptop when Claire asked another question. His eyes lingered for half a second. He saw it. He understood it. Then he looked away. Not because he didn't care, but because he cared about consequences more. He knew how this worked. If he spoke, there would be tension. If there was tension, there could be a scene. If there was a scene, someone might record it. And if someone recorded it, his name could end up attached to something he didn't plan for. So he chose silence, not because he thought Claire was right, but because silence felt safer. Across the lounge, Olivia shifted in her seat. Her foot tapped against the floor. Her phone was in her hand, but she wasn't really scrolling. She was watching. Olivia looked like someone who had learned that trouble costs money. Trouble costs time. Trouble costs energy you don't always have. As a single mom, getting involved didn't feel noble. It felt risky. What if security got called? What if flights were delayed? What if her child got scared? What if she was labeled difficult, so she stayed quiet, aid? And around them, everyone else followed the same pattern. One woman adjusted her jacket. Another checked her watch. A man put in his earbuds even though nothing was playing. Everyone saw. Everyone knew. No one wanted to be the first to say, "This isn't right." Naomi stood there in the center of it, holding her posture with quiet dignity. But if you looked closely, you could see the cost. Her hand trembled slightly on the strap of her bag. Just a small movement. Just enough to show she was human. She swallowed once, slowly, then lifted her chin again. That's the thing about dignity. It doesn't mean you don't feel the disrespect. It means you don't give the other person the satisfaction of seeing it break you. Lena saw everything. She saw the tremble. She saw the swallow. She saw the way Naomi was being forced to stand there like she had something to prove. And something inside her tightened, because she recognized that feeling. Not this exact place, not this kind of lounge, but that sense of being judged without explanation, of being questioned without reason, of being treated like you don't automatically belong. She had felt it at school. She had felt it in stores. She had felt it when people looked at her mom a little too long at checkout counters. And now she was watching it happen again. Only this time, it was happening to someone who didn't deserve it at all. So let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a moment like that where your stomach knots because you know something is wrong, but the room is acting like everything is normal? Where you think, someone else will say something, but no one does. And that's how silence becomes powerful. Because silence doesn't just avoid conflict, it protects it. It turns one person's bad behavior into something that feels acceptable. Not because it is, but because no one challenges it. Claire's authority didn't come only from her badge or her tablet. It came from the fact that no one was stopping her. Silence was backing her up. That's what makes moments like this dangerous. Not the cruelty itself, but how easily it survives when everyone decides it's inconvenient to interrupt. People often think the person doing harm holds all the power. But in reality, power multiplies when the witnesses choose not to act. And most adults don't stay silent because they agree. They stay silent because silence feels safe. Safe from embarrassment. Safe from attention. Safe from trouble. Adults learn early that keeping the peace is often rewarded more than doing what's right. And the older you get, the higher the cost of speaking feels. You could lose your reputation. You could lose your comfort. You could lose your smooth day. Lena didn't have those things. She didn't have a career to protect. She didn't have an image to maintain. She didn't have power to lose. She only had one simple rule, planted in her by her mother. Right is right, wrong is wrong. Adults carry hundreds of buts. But I don't know the whole story. But maybe I misunderstood. But it's not my place. But I don't want trouble. And those buts create a world where injustice doesn't need to be loud. It only needs people to be uncomfortable enough to stay quiet. Naomi wasn't standing there because Claire was brave. Naomi was standing there because the room was silent. And Lena felt it. She felt that moment approaching, the moment where fear and conscience collide. She looked at her mom. Rachel's face was calm, but her eyes were tense, protective, calculating, trying to keep her daughter safe. And Lena understood that too, because her mom wasn't teaching her to be small. She was teaching her to survive. But then Lena looked back at Naomi. and she saw a woman being forced to absorb disrespect in order to keep things easy for everyone else. And something clicked. Sometimes staying safe and staying right don't line up. Sometimes you don't get both. Sometimes you have to choose between comfort and conscience. The room was still frozen. Claire was still tapping. Naomi was still standing. And Lena's heart started beating faster, because she knew what was coming. That moment where your heart says, "Do something," and your fear says, "Don't." And the whole world seems to pause, waiting to see which one you listen to. Claire didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. In places like this, power didn't come from shouting. It came from looking calm while making someone feel small. Naomi stood near the priority boarding line with her pass in hand. Simple clothes, clean shoes, nothing that begged for attention. But there was a quiet dignity in the way she carried herself, the kind that comes from knowing your worth without needing to announce it. Claire noticed her immediately, not with curiosity, with judgment. She walked over, latte in one hand, tablet in the other, her smile polished and professional. "Ma'am," she said lightly, "are you sure you're in the right area?" Naomi lifted her boarding pass without a word. Claire took it, glanced at it, then looked back at Naomi's face, then back at the pass, as if the paper made sense. But the person holding it didn't. "You have priority boarding," Claire said slowly. "Okay. And may I see your ID?" Naomi handed it over. Calm, polite. No resistance. Claire scanned it once, then again. Then she frowned slightly. That's strange." That word landed heavier than it sounded. Strange didn't mean a technical issue. It meant doubt. It meant suspicion. It meant, you don't belong here as easily as others do. Naomi waited. Claire tapped on her screen. Slowly. Too slowly. She asked for the boarding pass again. Even though it was already in her hand, she turned the ID at different angles. She walked 2 steps away, then back. Every movement stretched the moment longer than necessary, and Claire's tone stayed soft the entire time. That was the trick. If Naomi got frustrated, Claire could call her difficult. If Naomi raised her voice, Claire could call her disruptive. If Naomi protested, Claire could say she was just following procedure. This was the kind of power that hid behind rules, not to protect people, but to control them. Lena stood nearby, pretending to look at her phone, hearing everything. Her chest felt tight. She could tell something was wrong, even if nothing sounded loud. Her mother had always told her, "Be respectful, but don't accept what isn't right, except standing here, surrounded by adults." Lena understood how hard that second part really was. Naomi stayed steady, but Lena noticed the small signs. The way Naomi's fingers tightened around her bag, the way she took a slow breath through her nose, like she was bracing herself. Claire leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Where are you traveling today?" Naomi answered. "And what's the purpose of your trip?" That question didn't belong to boarding. It belonged to judgment. Naomi paused, just briefly, then answered again. Claire nodded like she was listening, then said, "I'll need to verify this." "Verify what?" Naomi asked quietly. Claire smiled. "We just want to maintain standards in the priority area." Standards. That word cut deeper than any insult. It suggested that Naomi herself was the problem. Around them, no one spoke. Mark glanced over, then looked away. Olivia shifted in her seat but stayed silent. Others pretended to read boarding screens. This was where Claire's real power came from. Not her badge, not her job title, but the silence of the room. When people stay quiet, someone like Claire gets to decide what's normal. She turned and started walking past Naomi again, latte still in hand, confident and unbothered. Naomi shifted slightly to give her space, and then it happened. Claire's foot caught on nothing. Not a bag, not a wire, nothing at all. But her body dipped just enough, her wrist tilted just right, and the coffee flew. It splashed across Naomi's white shirt, spreading fast, dark, and impossible to miss. The lounge froze. You could hear the liquid hit the floor. You could hear someone inhale sharply. Claire gasped, hand to her chest. Oh my goodness! But she didn't rush to help. She didn't grab napkins. She didn't apologize like someone who meant it. She looked at the stain for half a second. Then she laughed softly and said, "Wow, priority areas always get a little messy, don't they?" Messy. Not the coffee. The people. Naomi looked down at her shirt, then back up. Her voice stayed calm. "Could you please help me clean this?" Claire tilted her head. "There are restrooms down the hall. You can take care of it there." Then she added, "Try not to delay boarding." That was the moment the humiliation became undeniable. This wasn't an accident. It was a message. I can do this to you. Right here. And no one will stop me. Lena felt her throat tighten. Because being embarrassed privately is one thing. Being humiliated on purpose, in front of witnesses, is another. And the worst part, no one moved, no one spoke. The silence wrapped around the scene like permission. Naomi stood still, coffee dripping from her shirt, dignity intact, but visibly shaken. Not because of the stain, but because of what it represented. And Lena knew something had changed. Because if nobody said anything now, then this became acceptable. And once something like this becomes acceptable, it never stops at coffee. Before Lena moved, before anyone broke the silence, there was a moment that felt heavier than the coffee on Naomi's shirt. A moment where nothing happened, and yet everything was being decided. So let me ask you something. If you were standing there, what would you say first? Not what you wish you'd say later. Not the perfect speech, just the first sentence. Would it be loud? Would it be careful? Would it be a question or a statement? Because evil rarely needs violence. It survives on confusion, on hesitation, on people thinking, "I'm not sure if this is my place." And that's exactly why the first sentence matters. Module 1. If it were you, what would your first sentence be? Not an argument, not an insult, just a clear line that names what is happening. Something like, was that an accident? Or was it intentional? Why aren't you helping her? Is this how staff are trained to treat passengers? Can we get a supervisor? Please. The goal is not to win. The goal is to remove ambiguity, because cruelty feeds on fog, and clarity is its enemy. You don't need authority. You don't need to be fearless. You just need to make the situation visible. Back in the lounge, Lena's heart was pounding. She wasn't thinking about heroism. She was thinking about her mom, about trouble, about safety, about everything she could lose by speaking. But she was also thinking about something else. If nobody says anything now, then this becomes normal. And once something becomes normal, it becomes permission. This was the line between watching and choosing, between discomfort and responsibility, between silence and the first sentence. Lena didn't step forward the way it happens in movies. There was no dramatic pause, no heroic music in her head, just a quiet moment where fear and responsibility met. And one of them had to move first. Naomi stood still as coffee soaked into the front of her white blouse. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look around for help. She simply reached for a napkin. like someone who had learned that dignity is something you protect quietly. But Lena saw what the room chose not to. The way Naomi's fingers tightened around her boarding pass, the slight tremble she tried to hide, the breath she took to steady herself. Lena's hand moved before her courage had time to retreat. She slipped the light scarf from her neck, walked over, and held it out to Naomi. Not fast, not hesitant, just enough to say, "You matter." Naomi looked up, surprised. Their eyes met. For a second, the airport noise faded. "Thank you," Naomi said softly. That simple exchange should have ended everything. But it didn't. Claire stepped forward, her voice calm, controlled, professional. "Let's not turn this into something unnecessary," she said to Naomi. Then she looked at Lena, not with anger, but with authority. "You need to go back to your seat. You're interfering." That was how power worked. Not with shouting, with labels. Lena froze for a moment. Her heart was racing. But she remembered her mother's words. "You don't need to be loud to be right. You just need to be clear." So Lena turned slightly, enough for people to hear, and said, "That wasn't an accident." The room shifted, not because she shouted, because she named the truth. Claire blinked. "Excuse me." "You spilled it on purpose," Lena said, quietly. "And you didn't even try to help her." The word you landed heavy. The word everyone didn't even need to be said. Because suddenly, there were witnesses. Mark stopped pretending to read his phone. Olivia tightened her grip on her bag. A few heads lifted, slowly, like people waking from something they didn't want to admit they'd been part of. Claire's tone sharpened. "You're a child. You don't understand procedure. If you continue, I'll have to involve security." There it was. Not justice. Control. Then Claire turned to Rachel. "Is this your daughter?" Rachel looked up, startled. And in her eyes was every calculation a working mother makes in a second. Trouble costs money. Delay costs work. Standing up can cost stability. She hurried over, her hand finding Lena's shoulder. "I'm sorry," Rachel began. She didn't mean Lena looked up at her mother, eyes wide, not rebellious, just honest. Asking without words, "Am I allowed to tell the truth?" Rachel paused, and in that pause lived every lesson she had ever tried to pass on. About dignity, about respect, about not surviving by shrinking. Claire seized the moment. "This area is restricted. If your daughter continues, you will both be removed from boarding. Both of you." That was the threat. Lena swallowed, but she didn't step back. "My mom didn't do anything," she said, "and neither did she." She nodded toward Naomi. "She was just standing here." Naomi's expression softened, not because she needed rescuing, because she recognized courage in its purest form. Claire tried to shift responsibility. "Ma'am, do you want to file a complaint? If not, let's move on." Naomi lifted her chin slightly. "I just want a board," she said, "without being treated like I don't belong." It wasn't loud, but it was unbreakable. The room felt different now. Not safe, not calm. Honest. Claire's smile faded. The polished mask cracked, and the silence that had protected her no longer did. Because Lena had shown something powerful. Being right doesn't require volume. It requires clarity. Mark shifted again, his mouth parting like he wanted to speak. Olivia's hand hovered near her phone, torn between fear and responsibility. No one had stepped in yet, but no one could pretend anymore. And Claire knew it. This wasn't over. Claire didn't like that the room had shifted. You could see it in the way her smile tightened, in the way her shoulders squared like she was putting on a uniform. She took one small step closer to Lena, lowering her voice the way adults do when they want to sound reasonable. "Sweetheart," she said, "this is an airport. There are rules. You can't just accuse staff. You need to go back to your mother. Now." And then she turned the threat into something that sounded like policy. "If you keep disrupting the boarding process, I will have security escort you out." That word, security, hit like a hammer. Rachel's hand tightened on Lena's shoulder. You could feel the panic rise in her chest, because moms don't just hear security. They hear missed flight, lost job, public scene, a mark on your record, a bill you can't pay. And that's exactly what Claire was counting on. Because people like Claire don't win by being right. They win by making everyone too scared to challenge them. But Lena didn't flinch. Not because she wasn't afraid, because she was prepared. She looked up at Claire and said, calm as if she were reading from a page, "I understand the rules." Claire blinked, almost amused. "Do you?" Lena nodded. And then she said, the one sentence that changed everything. "I recorded what happened. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be." The air in that waiting area shifted like someone opened a door in winter. Claire's eyes flicked just for a second to Lena's wrist, to the small watch band, then to Rachel's phone, then to Naomi. "Recorded," Claire repeated, still trying to hold her tone steady. "That's not appropriate." Lena didn't argue. She didn't insult her. She didn't act like a hero. She simply clarified the truth. "It shows you checking her pass," Lena said. "It shows you delaying her. It shows you spilling the coffee. And it shows what you said after." Claire's face went pale in a way makeup couldn't fix. Because suddenly, procedure wasn't her shield anymore. Evidence was. Claire tried to recover. "Fast. You're a minor." She snapped. "You can't." Rachel stepped in, voice shaking but firm. "She can record in a public area," Rachel said. "And you can call security. But you can't change what you did." That was the moment Rachel crossed the line she'd been scared to cross. Not into chaos, into clarity. And Naomi, still standing there with coffee stains on her blouse, finally spoke again. "Please," she said quietly, "just let them review the camera." Camera. That word landed like the final nail. Because airports don't run on opinions. They run on footage. Claire's eyes darted toward the ceiling, to the black domes mounted above the gate, the security cameras that had been there the whole time. Silently watching. A third witness that didn't get nervous, didn't look away, didn't forget. Claire forced a laugh that no one joined. "Fine," she said. Too quickly. "If you insist, I'll get a supervisor." And that was the first crack. Because 10 minutes ago, Claire was the supervisor. Now, she was asking for someone above her. A younger gate agent, someone who'd been pretending not to notice, stepped closer. "Claire," she whispered, "we can just pull the gate feed. It's standard." Standard. That word hurt Claire more than any insult could, because it meant you don't control this anymore. Mark, the businessman who'd been staring at his phone, suddenly cleared his throat like he had something to say. Olivia's eyes filled with guilt. People started shifting closer, drawn in by one thing they trusted more than feelings. Proof. And Lena. Lena didn't celebrate. She didn't smirk. She just stood there, heart pounding, holding her ground. Because this was the part adults don't always teach kids. It's good to be brave. But if you want your bravery to survive the real world, you don't just speak. You protect the truth while you speak. And in that moment, Claire finally realized she wasn't dealing with a disruptive child. She was dealing with a child who had receipts. The moment Lena said, "I recorded it," something invisible finally broke. Because Claire's power was never in her hands. It was in everyone else's hesitation. And hesitation has a funny weakness once one person moves. The whole room starts remembering it has legs. You could see it on Mark first. Mark was the guy in the expensive watch, the crisp blazer, the kind of man who's used to being listened to. He'd been staring at his phone like it was the most fascinating thing in the world, right up until the word recorded floated into the air. He looked up. He looked at Naomi's stained blouse. He looked at Claire, and for the first time, he looked ashamed. He cleared his throat, and it sounded loud in that quiet lounge. "That wasn't an accident," Mark said. Just like that. A sentence. Calm. Certain. Claire snapped her head toward him, eyes wide, trying to warn him without words. Mark didn't back down. "I saw you stop her," he continued. "I saw you make her wait. And I saw you bump into her on purpose." Claire's smile reappeared, but now it was desperate. "Sir, with respect." "You don't know what you saw," she said. "You were across the room." Mark didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I know what I saw," he repeated. "And so does everyone else. Everyone else." That's what made people shift in their seats, because now it wasn't one brave kid versus one supervisor. Now it was a room full of witnesses versus one person abusing a badge. Olivia was next. Olivia had been holding her son's backpack like a shield, eyes darting like she was trapped. She looked like the kind of woman who's had to survive on don't make trouble for too long. Her lips trembled. And then she spoke anyway. She said something after. Olivia whispered. Claire turned on her, sharper now. Ma'am Olivia flinched, then she swallowed. She said, "This is why we don't belong up here," Olivia said, voice cracking. She said it like it was a joke. The room went still, because that sentence wasn't about coffee. That sentence was about a person's place in the world. Naomi didn't react like someone waiting to be rescued. She didn't cry. She didn't lash out. She just closed her eyes for half a second, like she'd heard that line before in 100 different forms, in 100 different rooms. And then she opened them again. Steady. The younger gate agent, still hovering near the desk, looked like she couldn't pretend anymore. "I'm going to call the terminal supervisor," she said quietly. Claire snapped. "No, you will not." But it was too late, because when power gets exposed, it panics. And when it panics, it makes mistakes. The gate agent picked up the phone anyway. "Supervisor to gate C12, please," she said, voice shaking but professional. "We need a review." Claire tried to steer it back into her favorite story, the one where she's the reasonable authority and everyone else is the problem. "This child is being disruptive," Claire said, louder now, for the room. "She's recording staff. She's inciting Lena didn't move. Rachel didn't either." Naomi finally spoke, and her voice was calm enough to cut through all of it. "I don't want drama," Naomi said. "I want the truth recorded correctly. That's it. Not revenge, not humiliation, just the truth written down. So it can't be twisted later." And that's when you saw Rachel's face change, because Rachel had spent years teaching Lena the old lessons that still matter. Keep your dignity. Tell the truth. Don't do wrong just to stay comfortable. But every parent knows there's always a fear hiding under those lessons. What if my child does the right thing, and the world punishes her for it? Rachel looked at Lena, her quiet, observant, 13-year-old daughter standing there with a steady voice in a place full of adults who had gone silent. And Rachel realized something that hit her like a wave. The lesson wasn't just something she taught, it was something Lena became. A few minutes later, the supervisor arrived, different uniform, different tone. The kind of presence that didn't need to flex. "What's going on?" he asked. Claire rushed in first, words spilling fast. Sir, this passenger was creating confusion. And this minor is. The supervisor held up a hand. One at a time, he said. He looked at Naomi. Ma'am, Naomi didn't point fingers. She didn't insult Claire. She didn't beg. She simply said, "Please review the gate footage, and I can provide a recording from the passenger who witnessed it." The supervisor nodded slowly, eyes narrowing not at Naomi, but at Claire. Because the moment someone asks for footage calmly, it usually means they're not bluffing. A screen turned, a clip loaded, and with each second that passed, Claire's accident story lost oxygen. Here's the stamp you need to remember, because it's the truth in every room like this. Silence can become a kind of bad power. But the second someone speaks clearly, calmly, bad power starts collapsing. And right there in that glass-walled lounge, it happened in real time. Not because Lena screamed, because Lena made it impossible to pretend. The footage didn't just clear Naomi's name, it cleared something else. Too. It cleared that thick, sticky fog people hide behind when they don't want to act. The "maybe I misunderstood" fog. The "it's not my business" fog. The "I don't want trouble" fog. And here's the part that surprised everyone, especially Lena. Once the truth was undeniable, the room didn't erupt into celebration. It went quiet. Not the cowardly kind of quiet, the honest kind. Because in that silence, everyone had to face the same question. Why did it take a 13-year-old to do what grown adults wouldn't? That's why I don't want to rush past this moment like it's just a satisfying win. Because the real takeaway isn't, Lena is a hero. The real takeaway is this. Courage is not a gift some people are born with. It's a skill. And like every skill, it can be learned. Module 2. Courage isn't instinct. It's a trained skill. Most people think courage looks like a movie scene. A big speech, a fearless face, a perfect comeback. But real courage, the kind that actually works in real life, it usually looks boring. It looks like noticing details. It looks like controlling your breathing. It looks like choosing the right words, at the right volume, at the right time. Because smart courage isn't about being reckless. Smart courage is about being effective. And if you listen closely to what Lena did, you'll hear a blueprint anyone can use. Step 1. Observe. Lena didn't jump in the first second her stomach twisted. She watched. She noticed patterns. She noticed how Claire spoke to Naomi polite on the surface, sharp underneath. She noticed the way other adults avoided eye contact. She noticed where the cameras were. Most people miss this part because their emotions take over. But the first skill of courage is attention. Because you can't name what's wrong if you didn't truly see it. Step 2. Self-control. Lena was scared. Of course she was. But she didn't let fear make the decisions for her. And she didn't let anger make her sloppy, either. She didn't call Claire names. She didn't scream. She didn't turn it into a fight Claire could label as disruptive behavior. She did the hardest thing in a tense moment. She kept her voice steady. That's not personality. That's training. That's something you can practice, even in small moments at home, learning to speak clearly when your heart is racing. Step 3. Name the wrongdoing. This is where most people fail. They hint, they joke, they whisper. And bad behavior loves hints and whispers. Lena didn't attack Claire as a person. She named the action. This wasn't an accident. She's being delayed on purpose. That comment was insulting. No drama, just clarity. Because wrong doesn't need to be loud to be wrong. And right doesn't need to be loud to be right. Right needs to be clear. Step 4. Call an ally. Courage doesn't mean standing alone. Lena didn't try to become the judge, the jury, and the police. She forced the situation into the open so other people could step in. And once she did, Mark spoke, Olivia spoke, the gate agent made the call. That's not luck. That's strategy. In real life, the safest way to stand up is often to widen the circle. Bad power hates crowds. It thrives in isolated moments. Step 5. Preserve proof. This part is uncomfortable for people, but it's the truth. Feelings don't hold up under pressure. Evidence does. Lena recorded because she understood something many adults forget. When someone abuses authority, they don't just hurt you. They rewrite the story afterward. And evidence stops the rewrite. It turns, she said. She said, into here's what happened. Step 6. Report to the right authority. Not social media first. Not arguing forever. The right channel. A supervisor. A formal report. A review of footage. Because the goal isn't to feel brave. The goal is to restore justice. And that brings us to the most important lesson Rachel saw that day. You can raise a child with morals, but you also have to raise a child with tools. It's not enough to tell kids, be brave. You have to teach them how to speak without escalating, how to protect themselves while protecting someone else, how to gather allies, how to document the truth, how to go to the right person. That's what makes courage sustainable. Because the world doesn't just test your heart, it tests your judgment. And right there in that airport lounge, Lena proved something that should give you hope. You don't have to be born fearless to do the right thing. You just have to practice doing it wisely, one skill at a time. Naomi didn't ask for applause. She didn't stand there soaking wet, smiling like a victory photo. When the supervisor finally arrived, when Claire's voice went thin and careful, when the room started breathing again, Naomi did something that didn't fit the usual script. She looked at Rachel first, not like a stranger, like a mother recognizing another mother. Then her eyes moved to Lena, and for a second, Lena thought Naomi might say, "Thank you." Maybe even hug her. But Naomi didn't do any of that. She simply said, quiet enough that it wasn't for the crowd, "Are you two okay?" That question tells you everything about who Naomi is, because some people want justice for themselves. Naomi wanted safety for everyone in the blast radius. Rachel nodded, still shaken, still holding her daughter's shoulder, like the world might reach in and snatch her away. "We're fine," Rachel said, though her voice didn't fully believe it. Naomi glanced at the gate area, at the supervisor speaking into a radio, at the small knot of passengers watching like they just witnessed something they couldn't unsee. Then she turned back and said, "I'm going to finish the report. But before I go," she reached into her tote bag, nothing fancy, nothing loud, and pulled out a clean scarf, soft, neutral color, the kind you keep for airports because planes are always freezing. She handed it to Lena, not to Naomi. "Give this to her," she said. Lena held it with both hands like it mattered more than fabric, like it was proof that someone decent still existed. Naomi's white blouse was stained, not just by coffee, by the kind of humiliation that tries to stick to you, even after you leave the building. But Naomi stood there anyway, shoulders squared, voice calm, face composed. And that's important. So let's say it out loud. Naomi wasn't saved. She didn't become a helpless victim waiting for a child to rescue her. Naomi chose restraint because she understood the game. If she exploded, Claire would win. If she begged, Claire would win. If she broke down, Claire would win. So Naomi did what strong people often do in unfair moments. She stayed polite, not because she was weak, because she was wise. And once the truth was documented, once the cameras and witnesses did their job, Naomi didn't stay in the spotlight. She stepped out of it. As the supervisor asked for statements, Naomi leaned closer to Rachel. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Rachel looked cautious. In airports, questions feel like traps. But Naomi's tone wasn't sharp. It was steady. "Do you have an email I can reach you at?" Naomi asked. "Or a mailing address? Whatever you're comfortable with." Rachel blinked. Why Naomi didn't say. "Because I'm powerful." She didn't say. "Because I can make this right." She didn't even say. "Because you deserve it." She said something simpler, more grounded. "Because your daughter did something rare today," Naomi said. "And I don't want it to cost her." That hit Rachel like a wave, because every parent knows that fear. You teach your child to do the right thing, and then you wonder if the world will punish them for it. Rachel hesitated, then scribbled her information on the back of an old receipt. Her hand was still trembling. Naomi folded the paper once and tucked it away like it was important. Then she looked at Lena again, and her voice softened. "You were clear," Naomi told her. "You didn't get loud. You didn't get sloppy. You were precise." Lena didn't know what to do with that word, precise. She just nodded, cheeks hot, eyes stinging. Not from tears yet, but from the strange shock of being seen. Naomi leaned in one last time. "Keep that," she said. "That skill. Don't lose it." And then she walked away to finish her statement, like a grown woman handling grown business. No speech, no pose, no hero moment. Just dignity. Weeks passed. The airport incident became one of those memories Rachel replayed at night when the house was quiet. Sometimes she felt proud. Sometimes she felt sick, thinking about how close Lena came to being labeled disruptive just for telling the truth. And life didn't magically get easier. Bills didn't disappear. Rachel still worked long shifts, still did the math on groceries, still stared at college brochures like they were written in another language. And Lena went back to being the girl who didn't like attention, except now she carried this new weight. If I could speak up there, why do I freeze everywhere else? Then one afternoon, 3 weeks later, a letter arrived. Not junk mail, not a bill. An actual envelope. Thick paper. Clean logo. The kind of mail that makes your heart beat faster before you even open it. Rachel stood at the kitchen counter holding it like it might be a mistake. Lena hovered nearby, pretending she didn't care. But she didn't sit down either. Rachel opened it. Her eyes moved across the page. Then she covered her mouth, and Lena watched her mother's face change in real time from confusion to disbelief to something close to relief. "What is it?" Lena asked. Rachel didn't answer right away, because sometimes when you've been fighting for so long, you don't know how to receive help without flinching. Finally, she said, "It's an opportunity." The letter was from a Youth Leadership and Skills Foundation, one of those programs that doesn't just hand out money and call it a day. It offered Lena a full placement in a mentorship track, training, academic support, career exposure, a real plan. Not "here's cash." Good luck. A door, a path, and at the bottom, in a smaller paragraph, there was a second offer. A part-time paid role for Rachel Community Coordinator for families in their area. Flexible hours, steady pay. Work that actually matched her values. Rachel read that line twice like her eyes were lying. Lena whispered, "Is this real?" Rachel turned the page, and there it was. A handwritten note. Short and simple. No fancy signature. Just, "You weren't asking for help. You were raising courage. This is my way of saying keep going." No title. No public credit. No announcement. But Rachel knew. She knew exactly who it was from. Naomi didn't repay them like a movie. She invested in them like a wise person, because Naomi wasn't interested in being seen as someone's savior. She was interested in building the kind of world where a girl like Lena doesn't stand alone. And that's the sweetest twist of all. Naomi didn't get rescued. Naomi chose to lift someone else quietly, intentionally, and in a way that would last long after the airport lights faded. 3 months after that day at the gate, the coffee stain was long gone. But the record wasn't, because here's what most people don't understand. Real justice isn't a viral moment. It's paperwork. It's witness statements. It's security footage with timestamps. It's the unglamorous part where the truth gets locked into a system so it can't be rewritten later. And that's exactly what Naomi insisted on. Not revenge. Not a scene. A record. The airport opened an internal case. The supervisor filed the incident report. The footage from the boarding cameras was reviewed, clipped, archived, and attached to the complaint. Claire's accident wasn't treated like gossip. It was treated like misconduct. And yes, there were consequences. Claire didn't get to hide behind her favorite shield. I was just following protocol. Because protocol doesn't give you permission to humiliate people. It doesn't give you permission to delay someone on purpose. It doesn't give you permission to punish a child for speaking the truth. The investigation didn't take a day. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow, methodical, and very uncomfortable for the people who had been comfortable for too long. Claire was pulled from boarding duties while the review was happening. That alone shook her, because her power came from that podium, that scanner, that uniformed certainty. Without it, she was just a person who had done something ugly in public. In the end, she wasn't given a fresh start at another gate. She was formally disciplined and removed from any role involving passenger screening or priority boarding. Depending on the internal policy and the severity of prior complaints, it landed where it should have landed: suspension, and then termination. And if you're wondering, did she apologize? She tried, but it wasn't the kind of apology that heals. It was the kind of apology that saves careers. I'm sorry if anyone felt offended. I didn't intend. It was taken out of context. The problem with those apologies is simple. They're still about her. They're not a confession. They're a negotiation. And the airport didn't accept it as the end of the story. Because Claire wasn't the only issue. She was the symptom. So the airport did something that matters even more than firing one person. They changed the rules around the power. They updated boarding procedures so one employee couldn't stall a passenger indefinitely without a documented reason. They added a clear escalation path, meaning if a passenger disputes a delay, a supervisor has to respond within minutes, not when available. And they rolled out mandatory training on misuse of authority and discrimination training that didn't just say, "Be kind," but explained how bias hides inside polite language and reasonable questions. Because that's the most dangerous kind of cruelty, isn't it? The kind that smiles while it cuts. Now, let's talk about the witnesses. Because if you were watching that day, you remember them. You remember Mark, well-dressed, calm, corporate, eyes forward like the boarding screen was the most important thing in the world. You remember Olivia, nervous, protective, checking her phone, pretending she didn't see because she couldn't afford trouble. They weren't villains like Claire, but they weren't innocent either. They were the silence, and silence, when it protects wrongdoing, becomes a kind of cooperation. Mark didn't sleep well after the incident. He told himself he had responsibilities. He told himself, it wasn't my place. He told himself, someone else will handle it. But the truth kept poking holes in his excuses. Because a child handled it. A 13-year-old did what a room full of adults refused to do. Mark eventually wrote a formal statement after the fact, not because he was forced, but because the shame caught up with him. And then he did something that surprised people who only know his type from movies. He admitted it publicly, in a small community forum, and later in a corporate ethics panel. I saw it. I stayed quiet, and I regret that. That's not easy for a man like Mark. Men like him are trained to look composed, not accountable. But growth is rarely comfortable. Olivia's journey looked different. She didn't join panels. She didn't speak on stages. She started smaller because her life required smaller. She volunteered with a local parent group that focused on safety and advocacy, and she enrolled in a workshop called Courage with Evidence. It wasn't about being loud. It was about being useful. How to document a situation without escalating it. How to call a supervisor without sounding like a threat. How to ask for names and badge numbers without trembling. How to protect yourself while protecting someone else. And the first time she shared her story, she cried, not because she wanted attention, but because she finally named what it felt like. I didn't stay quiet because I didn't care, she said. I stayed quiet because I was scared. And I hate that fear controlled me. That's what redemption actually looks like. Not a perfect speech, a hard truth. And then there's Lena, the girl who didn't like being noticed, the girl who didn't want to cause trouble. After the program Naomi connected her to, Lena didn't become some fearless superhero overnight. She still got nervous. She still overthought. She still preferred the back of the room. But something in her changed permanently. She stopped believing courage had to be loud. A few months later, Lena's school held an assembly about character and leadership. One of those events people usually tune out. But when Lena walked up to the microphone, the room got quiet in a different way. Because kids can sense when a story is real. She didn't tell it like a performance. She told it like a lesson. I didn't win because I yelled, she said. I won because I was clear. I had proof. And I called the right person. And then she asked her classmates something that hit harder than any lecture from a principal. If you see something wrong, what's your first sentence? Not your best speech, your first sentence. Because that's where most people fail. They wait for a perfect moment, perfect confidence, perfect words. And while they're waiting, the wrong thing keeps happening. Lena taught them a different way. Simple, practical, safe. Ma'am, I need a supervisor. That's not okay. I'm recording for safety. Please state your name. Short sentences. Strong enough to stop harm. Smart enough to protect yourself. And somewhere in the audience. Rachel watched her daughter and felt that deep, quiet kind of pride that doesn't need applause. Because Rachel realized something. The values she tried to teach, right and wrong, dignity, self-control, didn't just survive the world. They worked in the world. So if you're asking, where are they now? Claire lost the privilege she abused. The airport changed the system that enabled her. Mark and Olivia had to face themselves and chose to grow instead of hiding. And Lena didn't become loud. She became solid. And Naomi stayed exactly who she was, a woman who doesn't need to be praised for doing the right thing, because she's too busy making sure the right thing lasts. And that's the part people love to watch, when the truth finally wins. When the bully loses their badge, when the room stops pretending. But I want you to hold on to something deeper than the satisfaction. Because this story was never really about coffee, or a gate, or one nasty supervisor. It was about a choice that shows up in real life more often than we admit. Most of us think we'll stand up one day, when we're older, when we're braver, when we've got the perfect words, when we're sure we won't look foolish. But wrong doesn't wait for you to feel ready. Wrong shows up on a random Tuesday, in a public place, with people watching. And it counts on one thing: confusion. It counts on the bystanders thinking. Maybe I misunderstood. It counts on the victim thinking. If I stay polite, it'll pass. It counts on the witness thinking. Someone else will handle it. And while everyone is hesitating, the cruelty gets bolder. That's why Lena didn't win with a speech. She won with clarity. She didn't scream. She didn't insult. She didn't try to destroy anyone. She simply refused to let the wrong thing be blurry. And that's the lesson I hope you take with you. Courage isn't a personality trait some people are born with. Courage is a skill you can practice, like driving, like public speaking, like learning to stay calm under pressure. And it starts smaller than you think. It starts with one sentence. Not your perfect sentence, your first sentence. Because the first sentence breaks the spell. It pulls the situation out of the shadows and into the light. So here's a practical map you can keep in your back pocket, especially if you're someone who freezes, or you're worried about safety. You don't have to fight. You don't have to be loud. You just have to be clear. Please state your name. I need a supervisor right now. That's not okay. I'm recording for safety. Can you repeat what you just said? Short, calm, firm. And if you can't say it out loud, you can still do something. Stand closer to the person being targeted. Make eye contact. Offer a napkin, a jacket, a seat. Ask, are you okay loud enough for others to hear? Because dignity isn't just defended with big gestures. Sometimes dignity is defended with the smallest act of presence. And if you're a parent watching this, or an older sibling, or an aunt, or a coach, listen carefully. Your kids won't become what you tell them. They become what they watch you tolerate. They learn honor by watching how you handle discomfort. They learn character by watching whether you stay silent when silence is convenient. Rachel didn't raise a perfect child. She raised a child with a compass. And that compass didn't point to safe. It pointed to right, with wisdom. That's traditional values in the real world, not just words. Action. So before we end, I want to ask you the same question we paused on earlier, because this is where stories become real life. If you were there, and you saw what Lena saw, what would your first sentence be? Drop it in the comments, and tell me this too. Who taught you the difference between right and wrong? Was it a parent? A grandparent? A teacher? Someone you miss, because sometimes the strongest thing we can do is keep those lessons alive by using them. And if this story reminded you of the kind of world we should be building, one where dignity is defended and truth is spoken clearly, then stay with us. Subscribe, because we tell stories like this for a reason, not to entertain you, to strengthen you. So the next time life tests you without warning, you won't wait until you feel strong enough. You'll start with one sentence, and that will be enough.